My name is Adele Hodges. I'm the granddaughter of Roscoe Lee Hodges Sr., the daughter of Roscoe Lee Hodges Jr. They called him Buster, and they called my grandfather Raz. So I don't know where Raz came from, but I'm sure it came something to do with Roscoe, but Raz was my grandfather, Buster was my father. Um, Grandfather had 4 children. Everybody knows my Aunt Dot. Did you know my Aunt Dot? No, okay. We had Aunt Bertha, Aunt Dot, Aunt Helen, and my father, Buster, was the 4th child and the only boy. And of course, he was spoiled by all the aunts and uncles. But and like I said, one other of my father's siblings, Helen, had children. Dot and Bertha had no children. Um, well, my Aunt Dot, when she graduated high school, I'm not sure she went to beauty school, but she moved to Connecticut. And then when my father got out of the army, he moved to Connecticut to be with her. Apparently, my father's my grandfather knew my mother's brother, the oldest brother, and they were both mechanics. So my father was introduced to my mother through her brother. And she went after high school to live with her sister who lived in Staten Island, New York. And somehow my mother and father met, and my father would go down from Bridgeport to Staten Island to meet up with my mom. They fell in love, they got married, and eventually they moved to Connecticut, where my oldest brother was born. But I call him the Alpha and Omega because when my mother got pregnant with me, he sent her back to her mother in Laurinburg, North Carolina, to have me. And then he followed behind her. He went back into the army, and they had 2 more daughters while he was in the army. And then he was stationed at Fort Bragg, of course. And then making a long story short, they had 9 children total. The first one and the last one were born in Connecticut because I had a middle brother that passed away. He crib death, or what they call crib death. Anyway, but anyway, so before my last brother was born, they moved back to Connecticut with 7 children, where my youngest brother was born. So there were 8 of us total.
Okay.
And we lived here. We spent our summers in North Carolina. My father, when we first got here, as soon as school was out, they'd pack us up and ship us to back to North Carolina for the summer. And before school started, they'd come back and pick us all up. So it was quite the adventure. Yeah.
When your dad moved to Connecticut, it was from Southern Pines where he was
Correct.
living?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is there a military base in Southern Pines?
Fort Bragg, Southern Pines is just southwest of Fort Bragg. Actually,
Was anybody so who was in the military? Not your grandfather, but your dad?
my dad was in the military at the time, and then he got out. Then he went back in after he came back to North Carolina. I don't know if it was the reserves or he just joined up again for a stint. But yeah.
So now let's talk about the summers. So start at the beginning. You know, your parents, you said, would pack you up and send you. Just go through, where would you stay? What would you do? How many of you were there? How many of, your cousins did you kind of hang out with? Just tell me the story of all of that.
Well, it was kind of an adventure, really, because, school's out, we're heading to North Carolina. We go to my grandmother and grandfather's house, and we would literally stay sometimes at my father's mother and father's house. And then my grandfather, Raz, would take us to visit my mother's mother. And then sometimes we'd stay there. And that's where we did most of the work. We called it free labor because my mother's mother had a farm and she grew cotton. So we picked cotton, we primed tobacco, the older ones. The younger ones, they didn't do anything. But the older ones, we did all of that, and a lot of picking cotton and a lot of working across the road at the where they tobacco fields were, and then my brother my Roscoe the third, actually, he picked peaches. And so we called it free labor because we didn't get paid. The grandparents did, so, but that was okay. They fed us. But especially when, and then we'd go to the old home place every once in a while to visit Aunt Honey and eat her breakfasts were awesome. So Aunt Honey, Aunt Bertha, we'd spend time there. We never stayed there, but we'd go and visit and then come back. So that was our Sundays, where we'd go around visiting relatives. But
Do you remember any stories that either your father or your grandfather told you about the Hodges family and the Hodges kind of legacy?
well, I all kinds of stories about Uncle Jim, and they didn't talk much about Fanny, but all the stories we got were the ones that came from the reunions we went to. How your grandmother would tell the story about um, about when she was little. They would think that they were little white girls, and she would protest, "I am not white." But those kind of stories that we got from the reunions, and they would all, I remember one reunion, they had them all sitting up at the head, and we were all sitting in the back, and they would tell little stories about their life and growing up. But yeah, I just heard about the old, I've been to the old home place and saw, when I was growing up, some of the farming that was going on in the area. But when Aunt Honey started to baking, everybody, it was like joy. You just come in, you smell the bread baking. She would cook sausages, and especially the breakfast food. She'd have sausages and grits and biscuits, and sometimes we had pancakes, and it was like feeling good when you come to Aunt Honey's, because she was always cooking up something. And the dinners were like chicken, some kind of chicken. And it was, I mean, she put on what we call put on the dog when she knew people were coming, and she would just cook and cook and cook. And she goes, "Eat some more, eat some more." So it was, yeah, coming down there, we would play in the yard when we were little, but as we got older, we'd sit in the house and we'd talk to her and hear some of her stories. And I remember once when I was older, Aunt Bertha lived with Aunt Honey, and my father, Roscoe Buster, was there to take care of the sisters. And my father was going to the store, and Aunt Bertha told him to make sure he brings her back a pack of cigarettes. And I said, "Aunt Bertha," I said, "you're still smoking." And needless to say, she was smoking while she was telling the story. And so she said, "I'm 95 years old," or however old she was. She was old. She goes, "You think it's gonna kill me?" And I said, "You got a point there, Aunt Bertha." So Dad, bring her the cigarettes. So, and then so she said, I know that she said that she'd wake up with a cigarette and she'd go to bed with a cigarette. So it was like all day long, cigarette from cigarette. So she's the only person I know who lived to old age chain smoking, and she was definitely a chain smoker. And yeah, on Honey. Everybody loved Aunt Honey. She was like, she was, you get a hug from Aunt Honey and you just think you've gone to heaven. It was so nice. She's a sweetheart, sweetheart. My grandfather was a mechanic. He was also a farmer. So when he came home, he had stuff to do, in his garden, as we call it. It was a big garden. So I mean, he was a dedicated mechanic, even though he worked in downtown Southern Pines, and um, his work was very important to him. So, and then my father, who actually went to Fayetteville State and got a associate's degree in auto mechanic, and he worked, he held down several jobs. He was a mechanic here, and then he worked at another place. And even after he moved to Connecticut, he always worked at some kind of auto shop, as well as, he did street mechanic. And so he was always working, always dirty. His hands were always dirty. So my mother, and she worked 2 and 3 jobs because of, she had 8 children to feed. And so she was never lazy. In fact, my mother worked until she was like 75. And she literally she only stopped working because she realized, traveling into New York City, where she finally ended up, her job took her, she said, I don't have to do this anymore. So she decided to quit. Or retire, actually. So she actually quit, but they said, come back and retire. That way you get your pension. So she did, went back for 2 months. But so I mean, and my father always said, um, you always have money in your pocket. You work and you have money in your pocket. I don't care if it's your last dime, you don't give it away. You save that till you make another dime, and then you can give that one away. So, but yeah, they always stress, work hard, do good, and keep some money in your pocket, or in the bank, actually. Yeah. So, and yeah, so I'd look at my grandmother, my grandfather's wife, um, Rowena, as he calls her. Um, she worked hard keeping the family together. She didn't work, but she was a housewife. That was the first housewife I ever knew. So, and so her skills was making sure that everything at the home front was taken care of, like taking care of all the grands when we were there, or even before we moved to Connecticut. My father had 7 children before he moved to Connecticut, and my grandmother helped take care of us until we moved to Connecticut. Um, and she'd get up in the morning, and she was the last one to go to bed at night. So uh, yeah, so it was so we saw that working hard, taking care of taking care of your responsibilities is very important.
Um, just talk a little bit about what the reunions and going to the reunions has meant to you.
Um, the reunions are a great way to connect with people you didn't know before, cousins that, no matter what their walk in life. In fact, the first few reunions, my father was there, and he would introduce us to his cousins, and some of those cousins we've kept in touch with throughout the years, because and my father is a people person. I don't know. Did you meet my father? You ever met Buster? Uh, but he was a people person, and he loved family. So if you were related to him, he got to know you. He made sure we knew who you were. So that's how we got around to visiting. And when they would come down, he would take us to Hope Mills and meet all of his cousins and relatives. But yeah, so the reunions are a way to keep connected with some of those cousins and relatives that you didn't know, that you didn't know in the past. But you kind of gain another piece of your history as you learn who these people are.
Let's talk about your professional journey And what inspired that?
Oh my goodness. I can't say I was inspired by anybody to start my journey. But my well, everybody knows I'm a Marine, and I knew I didn't want to join the Army. My dad was in the Army. My oldest brother was in the Army. I never wanted to be a Marine. I dated a guy who was in the Marine Corps, and he cried every time he came home from on leave. So I didn't want to join the Marines, but I graduated from college and I decided that I wanted, you know, I didn't know what was ahead of me, so I wanted to try something different after, going to school. I started off wanting to be a teacher, but I realized that I probably wouldn't have fulfilled what I wanted to do as a teacher. So I thought maybe I'd try something different, and I just happened to walk by a recruiting office. I said, let me try the Army, the Air Force and the Navy. And then they discouraged me by saying that they were, a year to 6 months before they could allow me to enlist. And the Marine recruiter kind of tapped me on the shoulder and wondered why I didn't want to see him. So it was a cold day in March in Connecticut, right after a snowstorm. So waiting outside for my ride to come pick me up, which was my mother, wasn't a choice I'd like to make. So he invited me to come in and look out of his big picture window. So I said my famous last words. I agreed to come in and talk and sit and just watch. And of course, he got in my ear. Well, you could do this. Oh, you could do this. So eventually, he talked me into taking the ASVAB test, and my sister as well, who came in and said, "Mom's outside." He talked her into taking the test. Oh, it'll only take a few minutes. So we took the test, and he actually convinced her to go into the Marine Corps. And after he talked her into going, I had to go in and save her from those bad Marines. So um, I enlisted about a month after she did. And we met up at Paris Island. She was there. And then we kind of followed it to our first duty station out at Camp Pendleton, California. And then they realized I had a degree, and they convinced me into applying for the enlisted commissioning program, which I did reluctantly because I was only going to do 4 years and go home. 4 years, I said I did 4 years of college. I can do 4 years in the Marine Corps and go home. So it turned out to be 33. So
What was the year you enlisted?
1978. But I'm only 25, so don't do the math.
Good choice.
Yes, I say I tell everyone it's the best career I've never chose for myself. Yeah, so it was a good choice. It was a great, I think it was, for me, it was a great career. I've got to meet and so many different people and got to do so many amazing things and somewhat mold the lives of some young Marines who may have strayed, and hopefully had they came out good citizens. So
When we talked about your career, we didn't mention that command, but could you just talk a little bit about that?
well,
What year?
actually
What year it was?
it was I was there from the end of 2005 to 2008. January, the end of January 78. And when I first got the notice that I was selected to be the new commander, I was in Norway. So I thought for sure they've made a mistake. I why me and why me? So when I talked to one of the general officers that was on the selection board, I said, "Sir, is it the base or is it the battalion that that supports the base commander?" He goes, "No, you're the base commander." And I said, "Wow." And then I thought, oh my God, going to Jacksonville, North Carolina, that's in the South. And first of all, they're not going to accept the fact that it's a woman. never mind the fact that it's a Black woman. So, but when I got there, their arms were open. They understood the concept that, it's no longer general officer, it's going to be a colonel. And I was selected. And one guy said, well, you're the commanding officer. How else would we treat you? And I said, okay, we can do this. So once I realized I had the support of the surrounding community, as well as the other officers aboard the base, it was like being the mayor of a small town, and I had the support that I needed to get the job done, and that's all I was looking for. And I did this interview with NPR, and they said, well, are you going to command the base like a colonel or like a woman? I said, no, I'm a command the base like I'm the commanding officer of the base. A woman has nothing to do with it. Being Black has nothing to do with it. But I'm going to command it like the commander, and hopefully that's what I did. So yeah, people still talk about me. Hopefully not all bad, but it was a great tour. I was an honor to serve the Marine Corps in that capacity. Yes.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a big
It
deal.
is a big deal and a very proud moment for the family.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And glad to put the Hodges stamp on there. I'm honored to be a Hodges because um, I don't know, it's that connection to where my grandfather grew up. And, you know, and even there's two of us that there's 4 girls and 4 boys. 2 of us girls have never been married, and we still carry the name Hodges, and we're proud to say, I'm Hodges. And my little sister, she says, I'm Buster's daughter. So you don't mess with me because I'm Buster's daughter. Even Buster's gone, but that should be a threat. I'm a Hodges, and then, you don't mess with us. But it's a proud legacy that we lean on. And even though, like you said, we're spread apart, when there's a Hodges somewhere else, I find a connection to them. Like there's a Hodges somewhere near Toledo, Ohio. My sister lives in Toledo, Ohio, and she says she knows that her last name is Hodges, and there's a connection to us. So whatever that connection is, we have to find it. But it's a proud legacy to be, from whence we came and where we are now and what we're doing in the world. And we can proudly stamp the name Hodges on a lot of this stuff. So I'm proud of it. Proud of it. Yes.